somewhere between courage and protocol lives a decision that no human being should ever have to make in real time. You are standing in a hallway. You can hear gunfire behind a closed door. You can hear children screaming on the other side of that door. Your phone is receiving 911 calls are being relayed to you in real time. Children whispering their own names to dispatchers because they are too frightened to speak at full volume. You have a weapon. You have training. You have everything you need to go through that door. And something is stopping you. What is it? Is it fear? Is it a bad command decision from someone further up the chain? Is it a miscalculation, an assumption that the situation is something other than what it is, that is eating up seconds, then minutes, then an hour, while on the other side of that door something irreversible is happening? This episode is about the decision to enter, the moment when everything outside a locked door becomes secondary to what is happening on the other side of it, when every tactical consideration, every protocol, every chain of command collapses into a single question: are you going in or not? Some of the most important and most devastating moments in modern law enforcement history have happened in the space between that question and its answer. And the distance between getting that answer right and getting it wrong is measured not in miles, not in minutes, but in lives. This is the story of when cops are forced to enter. Story 1. The hallway that changed Uvalde Robb Elementary School, Uvalde, Texas, May 24, 2022. There is a school in Uvalde, Texas, that no longer exists. Robb Elementary School was torn down after what happened there on May 24, 2022. The building itself couldn't be kept. The community couldn't walk past it. A place that had been built for children, decorated with their artwork, full of their backpacks and their lunch boxes and their names written in their own handwriting on the cubbies outside their classrooms, became something that needed to be erased from the physical landscape because the memory it carried was too heavy to leave standing. But before we talk about what happened inside those classrooms, we need to talk about what happened in the hallway outside them, because the hallway is where the story truly lives. And the hallway is where the decision was made, or rather, where the decision was not made, that turned a terrible shooting into one of the most examined and agonizing law enforcement failures in American history. Salvador Ramos was 18 years old on May 24, 2022. He had attended Robb Elementary himself as a child. He had been a student in the same building where he drove that morning. He had been bullied severely during his school years, had withdrawn from high school due to excessive absences, had no criminal record, and had never received mental health intervention despite warning signs that later investigators would describe as deeply concerning. 11 days before the attack, he turned 18. The day after his birthday, he legally purchased his first AR-style rifle. The next day, he purchased a second one. He stockpiled 1,740 rounds of hollow-point ammunition. He posted threats on social media that were not reported to law enforcement. And on the morning of May 24th, he shot his grandmother in the face at their home, got in a car, crashed it near the school, and walked through an exterior door that could only be locked from the outside, a door that had been left propped open, and entered Robb Elementary School. What happened in the next few minutes was an act of violence so horrific and so deliberate that 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. 4 grade students who had been sitting in classrooms 111 and 112 that morning, who had arrived at school on a Tuesday with their entire lives still ahead of them. And then the hallway. The minutes that became an hour. The first law enforcement officers arrived at Robb Elementary within minutes of the shooting beginning. What followed has been described by the U.S. Department of Justice as one of the worst law enforcement failures in recent American history, a failure defined not by cowardice alone, but by something perhaps even more damaging, a catastrophic collapse of leadership, communication, and decision-making at the exact moment when all 3 were needed most. Within a short time of the shooting beginning, approximately 400 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies had converged on the school. 400 officers. From the Uvalde Police Department, the School District Police, the County Sheriff's Office, State Police, federal agents. An enormous concentration of trained, armed law enforcement personnel surrounding a single building. And for 77 minutes, they stood in the hallway outside classrooms 111 and 112 and did not go in. The Department of Justice's subsequent investigation, a report that ran more than 500 pages, described what it found as cascading failures of leadership, decision-making, tactics, policy, and training. It documented the specific moment when the on-scene commander, Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo, made a decision that would define the entire response. He reclassified what was happening from an active shooter situation to a barricaded subject scenario. Under active shooter protocol, the training that every law enforcement officer in the country has received since Columbine, the response is immediate. You go in, you find the shooter, you stop the shooter. Every second of delay is a second the shooter is uncontested. A barricaded subject scenario operates under completely different protocols. You establish a perimeter. You call for SWAT. You negotiate. You take your time. You wait. The gunman inside classrooms 111 and 112 was not barricaded. He was not in a standoff. He had active victims in the room with him, and he was continuing to fire. Multiple indicators made this clear in real time, including 911 calls from children inside the classroom that were being relayed to officers in the hallway, a radio announcement that students were likely still in the room with the shooter, and a Uvalde school district officer who heard his own wife, a teacher inside the classroom, announce over the phone that she had been shot. Children were calling 911 from inside that classroom, whispering their names to dispatchers, begging for help, telling dispatchers there were dead bodies. One student, Chloe Torres, told a dispatcher, "Please hurry. There's a lot of dead bodies. Some of my teachers are still alive, but they are shot." Those calls were being relayed to the hallway. Officers in the hallway could hear gunfire. And still, for 7 to 7 minutes, the decision was not made to go through the door. The parents outside, while officers stood in the hallway. Something else was happening outside the school that has become one of the most searing and undeniable images of what that day felt like from the outside. Parents were arriving. News of a shooting at the school had spread through the community the way terrible news spreads. Fast, incomplete, terrifying. Parents drove to the school. They ran to the school. They came because their children were inside and they needed to do something, anything, with a complete, overwhelming need to reach their child. They were held back by police officers. Some of them were handcuffed. One woman was tasered. Another was held to the ground. Officers were establishing a perimeter, following protocol, doing what they had been instructed to do, and the parents were outside, watching the building, knowing that inside it their children were calling 911 and nobody was going in. One mother, Angeli Rose Gomez, managed to talk officers into temporarily uncuffing her, and in the moment that followed, she did what no police protocol could contain. She ran to the school fence, climbed it, entered the building, and pulled her 2 children out. She got her own children out of an active shooting while the law enforcement response debated what kind of incident it was. That image, a mother climbing a fence because of people with guns and training and authority were standing in a hallway, became the defining symbol of what went wrong in Uvalde, the breach. At 12:50 in the afternoon, 7 to 7 minutes after the gunman first entered the building, a team from the United States Border Patrol Tactical Unit arrived and made the decision that should have been made within the first several minutes. They were going in. They breached the classroom door using a master key obtained from a school janitor. They exchanged gunfire with Salvador Ramos, and they killed him. The shooting was over within seconds of the door coming open. 19 children were dead inside those 2 classrooms. 2 teachers were dead. 3 victims, including teacher Eva Morales and student Xavier Lopez, still had a pulse when they were brought out of the classroom. The subsequent medical response was described as chaotic and disorganized. Morales, shot in the chest, died before reaching the hospital. Lopez, 10 years old, died in transport. The Justice Department's report, released in January 2024, contained a sentence that has since been quoted in congressional hearings, in criminal indictments, and in the public grief of an entire country. Had law enforcement agencies followed generally accepted practices in active shooter situations and gone right after the shooter and stopped him, lives would have been saved and people would have survived. Lives would have been saved. Former Uvalde School Police Chief Pete Arredondo was indicted on 10 counts of abandoning or endangering a child. As of this recording, that trial has not yet been completed. Former school officer Adrian Gonzalez was tried and acquitted in January 2026 on 29 child endangerment charges. The legal reckoning for what happened in that hallway is ongoing, but no legal outcome will bring back the 19 children and 2 teachers who were inside classrooms 111 and 112. And no investigation report, no matter how thorough, can fully capture what it was like to be a child in that room, calling 911 in a whisper, waiting for someone to come. Here's what I need you to think about and drop in the comments right now. The DOJ report found that at least 400 officers arrived at Robb Elementary that day. 400, and yet the decision to go in took 7 to 7 minutes. Do you believe the failure in Uvalde was primarily a leadership failure, a training failure, or something else entirely? Tell me below. Story 2. The door that had to be broken. The Shannon Street standoff, Memphis, Tennessee, January 11th to 13th, 1983. Nearly 40 years before Uvalde, in a neighborhood on Shannon Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee, 2 police officers knocked on the door during a routine call and found themselves stepping into one of the most bizarre and devastating hostage situations in American law enforcement history. The call on January 11th, 1983, was for an alleged purse snatching. Officers Ray Schwill and Bobby Hester responded. They had no particular reason to approach this call differently from any other. It was a house on a residential street. The complaint was minor. Everything about it should have been ordinary. What was inside that house was anything but. The home belonged to a man named Lindbergh Sanders, who called himself Black Jesus and led a group of followers who lived with him and practiced a form of worship that outsiders described as deeply controlling and isolating. On the day officers arrived, 12 men were inside the house with Sanders. As Schwill and Hester approached, 7 of those men fled. They were later captured. The remaining 6, along with Sanders himself, stayed inside. What happened next was almost immediate and completely without warning. The moment the officers were inside the threshold, both men were ambushed. Schwill took a gunshot wound to his face. By some extraordinary combination of training and survival instinct, he managed to get out of the house and radio for help. Bobby Hester was not so fortunate. He was taken hostage. The first backup officer to arrive, Officer Tommy Turner, attempted to force his way in and was shot in the head. A second officer, William Russ Aiken, entered the house and exchanged gunfire with the men inside, emptying his service revolver and retreating to get a shotgun from his cruiser before continuing. By the time police had established a perimeter, it was clear that the situation had become something far beyond a purse-snatching call. The negotiation that went nowhere. What Lindbergh Sanders wanted from the standoff, according to what he communicated to negotiators over the following 30 hours, was a platform. He wanted to broadcast the murder of a police officer over a Memphis radio station. He stated clearly that any attempt by officers to enter the house would result in immediate violence. And he seemed to mean it with complete sincerity. For 30 hours, Memphis police tried everything available to them. They negotiated. They established communication. They tried to understand what Sanders wanted and find a way to meet some version of it that didn't involve a police officer being killed on live radio. None of it worked. The situation reached a breaking point on January 13th. Bobby Hester, the hostage officer, had now been inside that house for over 30 hours. He had been beaten. He was suffering. And the intelligence coming out of the house made one thing clear. Hester was not going to be released voluntarily. If police did not go in, he was not going to come out. The Memphis Police Department SWAT team made the decision. They were going in. The assault on the house was fast and violent. SWAT stormed through the entry points, and in the exchange that followed, all 7 men inside, including Lindbergh Sanders, were killed by police gunfire. It was one of the highest single-incident death tolls in a law enforcement forced entry in American history. Bobby Hester was found inside. He had been beaten to death. The assault came too late to save him. In the aftermath, the Memphis Police Department faced significant criticism for multiple aspects of their response, both the decision to wait as long as they did and the manner in which the final assault was conducted. The department subsequently undertook a thorough review of its policies for hostage situations and emerged with one operational guideline that became fundamental. If a hostage has been injured, immediate intervention is required. Not negotiation. Not waiting. Immediate intervention. It was a policy written in blood. Bobby Hester's blood. What happened on Shannon Street in 1983 is not a story that most people outside of Memphis know, but it belongs in every discussion of what happens when the forced entry decision is delayed until it is too late. And it belongs in every discussion of what the aftermath of that delay costs, not just tactically, but in the life of a man who went to work on an ordinary Tuesday morning and never came home. Do you think 30 hours was too long to negotiate before the decision to breach was made? And is there a point in a hostage situation where further negotiation becomes itself a form of abandonment? Drop your thinking below. Story 3. When they went in and it worked. The Pulse nightclub and the officers who breached Orlando, Florida, June 12, 2016. Not every story in this episode ends in tragedy born from hesitation, because there have also been moments that don't always make as many headlines as the failures, when officers looked at a closed door and made the right call. When training, leadership, and the basic human commitment to protecting life aligned into a decision that was made fast, executed correctly, and saved people who would otherwise have died. June 12, 2016. Orlando, Florida. Pulse nightclub. The attack began at 2:02 in the morning. A gunman entered the crowded nightclub during Latin night and opened fire. In the initial moments, the shooting was fast and devastating. 4 to 9 people were killed that night and more than 50 were wounded in what was, at the time, the deadliest mass shooting in American history. But the attack did not end quickly. After the initial shooting phase, the gunman moved to a bathroom where a group of survivors had barricaded themselves. He took hostages. He communicated with dispatchers and with media. The situation shifted into a standoff that would last approximately 3 hours before law enforcement made the decision to breach. The Orlando Police Department's response has been studied extensively and is generally regarded as significantly more effective than many other comparable incidents, not without flaws, but a genuine example of a department adapting in real time to a situation that was evolving faster than any plan could keep pace with. When the decision to enter finally came, it came deliberately. Officers used an armored vehicle to breach a wall of the nightclub. They went in through multiple entry points simultaneously. The gunman was killed in the exchange of gunfire that followed. Among the survivors who were pulled out of that nightclub in the breach were people who had been hiding in bathroom stalls, in closets, under the bodies of those who had died around them. People who had sent what they believed were their last messages to their families. People who had been in that building for 3 hours not knowing if the door would ever open. The door opened. The speed and coordination of the breach. The willingness of officers to go in despite the very real danger of engaging an active shooter in a dark, chaotic, crowded environment is credited by survivors and analysts alike with preventing an even higher death toll. What good forced entry looks like. What the Pulse response demonstrated, and what law enforcement training programs have been built around since Columbine fundamentally changed the protocol, is that the forced entry decision, when made correctly and executed with training and coordination, is not a gamble. It is a deliberate act of prioritization. In the old framework, which governed law enforcement responses to hostage and barricade situations for decades, the default position was containment and negotiation. You surround the location. You establish communication. You wait. The assumption built into that framework was that waiting reduces danger. What the incidents after Columbine, from school shootings to nightclub attacks to domestic violence standoffs, have consistently shown is that this assumption is often catastrophically wrong. In situations involving active shooters, waiting does not reduce the danger to victims. It increases it. Every minute of waiting is a minute the shooter has uncontested access to people who cannot defend themselves. The post-Columbine protocol shift toward immediate, aggressive, coordinated engagement with an active shooter was not universally implemented. Not every department received the same training. Not every department practiced the same scenarios. Not every department had the same equipment, the same communication infrastructure, the same command clarity. You will prove that. Not because the officers that were individually cowardly. The DOJ report makes clear that the failure was systemic, not personal, but because systemic failure is still failure. And when the system fails in the middle of a classroom full of fourth graders, the cost of that failure is not abstract. Here is what I want to know. After Columbine in 1999, law enforcement training shifted dramatically toward immediate engagement. After Uvalde in 2022, additional reviews and reforms were called for. But do you believe that real, lasting change in law enforcement training and response protocols actually happens after these tragedies? Or does the system respond for a period and then drift back toward old patterns? Be honest in the comments. Story 4. What the door costs. Both ways. The weight of the decision, the people inside, and what we owe them. There are 2 ways to get the forced entry decision wrong. The first way is the one that defined Uvalde. You wait too long. You hesitate. You misread the situation, or you let command confusion and communication failure eat up the time that your victims needed you to use. You are outside the door while people are dying inside of it. And when the door finally opens, it opens too late. The second way is less discussed, but equally real, and it carries its own weight. You go in too fast. You go in without adequate intelligence about what is on the other side. You go in without coordination. You breach a location and find yourself in the kind of chaos where distinguishing threat from victim is not possible in the split second available to you. And in that chaos, people die who should not have died, not at the hands of the person who created the crisis, but at the hands of the response to it. There have been incidents in American law enforcement history where forced entries, executed under extreme pressure and with incomplete information, resulted in the deaths of hostages or bystanders caught in crossfire. Some of those cases have become lawsuits. Some have resulted in significant changes to tactical doctrine. And all of them, every single one, represents the same core truth. The forced entry decision is one of the hardest decisions in law enforcement. There is no version of it that is clean. There is no formula that removes the risk, and there is no outcome, however well executed, that doesn't cost something. The people inside. Before we close, we need to spend a moment with the people who are on the other side of every one of these doors. In Uvalde, their names were written on the memorial that now stands where Robb Elementary used to be. 19 children and 2 teachers. Their names carved in stone because they deserve to be remembered as individuals, not as a number in a statistic about mass casualty events. Jackie Cazares was 9 years old and loved softball. Xavier Lopez was 10 and had just been dancing at an award ceremony hours before the shooting. Eva Mireles had been a teacher for 17 years. Irma Garcia, her co-teacher, died in that classroom. Her husband, Joe Garcia, died of a heart attack 2 days later, in a grief so acute that his body gave out under the weight of it. Bobby Hester was a police officer who responded to a routine call in Memphis and spent the last 30 hours of his life inside a house he never should have had to be in, waiting for a door to open that opened too late. The 4 to 9 people killed at Pulse were there celebrating, dancing, being themselves in a space that had been built specifically to make them feel welcome and safe. They were killed in their joy. The ones who survived did so with wounds that are not only physical. These are the people the forced entry decision is ultimately about. Not the shooter, not the command structure, not the legal liability. The people inside. What we owe the ones who go through the door. There is something that gets lost in the analysis, in the DOJ reports and congressional hearings and the training reviews and the criminal indictments that deserves to be named directly. Going through a door when you know someone dangerous is on the other side of it is one of the most fundamentally courageous acts a human being can perform. Not the strategy, not the command, not the protocol, the physical act of moving forward through an entry point when every reasonable self-preservation instinct says to stop. The officers who went through the door at Pulse did that. The BORTAC agents who breached the classroom at Robb Elementary after 77 minutes did that. The officer at Shannon Street who emptied his revolver and went back for a shotgun did that. And the officers who were stopped from doing it, who were standing in a hallway in Uvalde with the training to go in and the weapons to go in and the awareness of what was happening on the other side of the door, and who were waiting for a command decision that was not coming, those officers carry something that no legal outcome will touch. They were there. They know what they heard. They know how long they stood there. And they will spend the rest of their lives with that knowledge. The DOJ report does not let the hallway officers off the hook entirely, but it also places a primary responsibility for the failure where the primary responsibility belongs, on the absence of leadership at the command level, on the critical misclassification of an active shooter as a barricaded subject, on the failure to establish any meaningful incident command in the first critical minutes when everything could still have been different. Leadership in law enforcement is absolutely critical, especially in moments of dire challenge. The DOJ report states, this leadership was absent for too long in the Robb Elementary School law enforcement response. Absent for too long. In a building full of 4th graders. The protocol that was supposed to prevent this. After Columbine, American law enforcement went through a transformation in how active shooter situations are trained for and responded to. The Immediate Action Rapid Deployment Protocol, which became the standard framework across departments nationwide, is built on a single foundational principle. Stop the killing first. Not perimeter. Not negotiation. Not waiting for SWAT. The first officers on scene, regardless of rank or assignment, go directly toward the sound of gunfire. They form a contact team. They move toward the threat. They stop the killing. This protocol was developed specifically because Columbine taught law enforcement that waiting for specialized resources while an active shooter has uncontested access to victims costs lives. It was refined after every subsequent mass shooting event. It was trained, drilled, and certified across thousands of departments. Uvalde had received this training. Chief Arredondo's indictment alleges specifically that he failed to follow active shooter training that he had received. The DOJ report confirms that officers in the hallway had received training that should have driven an immediate response. The protocol existed. The training existed. The officers existed. What did not exist in that hallway on that day was someone willing to say, "We are going in. Right now. All of us. We are going in." The forced entry decision is not a question that can be answered in the abstract. Every situation is different. Every building is different. Every threat is different. Every piece of intelligence available in the first moments of a crisis is incomplete, contradictory, and changing by the second. But there are things that can be said with certainty. Children calling 911 from inside a classroom while gunfire continues is not a barricaded subject situation. A hostage officer who has been beaten for 30 hours is not a situation where more time spent negotiating is helping. An active shooter with uncontested access to victims is not a situation where perimeter and a waiting game is the right answer. The people inside those doors, the students, the teachers, the hostages, the survivors, made their own decision the moment they picked up their phones and called for help. They decided to trust that someone was coming. They decided to believe that the system built to protect them was going to protect them. The question that every law enforcement agency in this country, every city council, every training department, every officer carrying a badge asks itself after watching what happened in Uvalde and what happened in Memphis and what happened in Orlando is whether that trust is justified, whether the system built to answer those calls has the leadership, the training, the command clarity, and the human courage to make the right decision in the moment when everything is on the line. The door is always there. Someone always has to decide whether to open it. Here is where I want your real thoughts, and I mean this one genuinely. After everything you just heard, after Uvalde, after Shannon Street, after Pulse, do you believe that the problem of law enforcement response to active threats is primarily a training problem that can be fixed with better protocols? Or do you believe it is a deeper human problem, about leadership, about decision-making under extreme pressure, about the gap between what people train to do and what they actually do in the moment when the door is right in front of them? Because if it is a training problem, the solution is more training. And if it is a human problem, the solution is something much harder to build and much harder to guarantee. Tell me what you think. Share this with someone who needs to hear this conversation. And remember the names of the people who were inside those doors, because they trusted that someone was coming. And the least we can do is remember that it mattered. Jacqueline Jackie Cazores, Xavier Lopez, Eva Mireles, Irma Garcia, Bobby Hester, and every other name that belongs in this conversation. They deserve the door to open sooner. We owe it to them to make sure it does. In case if you haven't subscribed now, comment and share this video, and I'll see you in the next one.